and welcome back to How to Podcast series. I have with me a fellow Canadian, yay, who's on the show with me today. There's two of us, I guess, now in Canada, so we've doubled our numbers, which is great. You know, that's a good increase right there.
Is.
Brad is here with me, Brad Walsh, and we're going to talk about podcasting. Brad has a very unique show. I love the idea behind how Brad has structured his show. It's quite unique. We'll get into that. We're going to talk about guesting on shows, what that does for you as a guest. Maybe that's a good place to start as a podcaster, being a guest. Many great things to talk about. Brad, welcome to the show, and tell everybody a little bit about your podcast.
Dave, first of all, I'd like to say thank you so much for bringing me on board to be part of your platform. I'm honored and happy to be here. So first, thank you very much for bringing me on. And like you said, we've doubled the numbers of Canadian podcasters.
There you go, right? Ta-da!
Which I love. We just need to keep up that momentum and continue to double the numbers. So that's one of our missions, is to grow the Canadian podcasting world. So we are on a mission, Dave.
Right. Okay. All right.
I am the host of the Empowerography Podcast, a platform created to help amplify the voices of women and elevate them through sharing their stories. So I interview strictly women. Not necessarily, I would say about 95% of my audience are entrepreneurs. And it's just been an incredible journey. The podcast turned 3 back in April of this year. And I have to say, Dave, I have met some of the most incredibly inspiring, kick-ass women. It's just been an amazing journey. And I just love having the opportunity to be able to sit down and share in these women's stories of transforming their pain into purpose, going through the adversity that they've been through and come out the other side, and what they've been able to accomplish. It's so awe-inspiring and amazing. And I'm so honored and blessed and feel so grateful to be able to share the stories of these women. Because I think, and this is a great segue into why we're here, I think it's important that we all share our stories, because no matter what anyone says, every single person on this planet has a story to share. And podcasting is an incredible platform to get your story out there.
Yes. And now what I love about your podcast, it's a male host interviewing female guests about women's podcasting type thing. Like your guests are amazing, but typically this would be a female host interviewing female guests. I love that it's you doing this, but what I love even more is the story behind why this matters to you. And you shared that with me a little bit about some very important, strong female leaders in your life, examples in your life, and why you're doing your show. Let's unpack that a little bit, because I think that gives some context to your show.
Sure. I am the father of 2 daughters. They are 22 and 24, and they're a big part of my why. They were both bullied in elementary school. My youngest was bullied by both boys and girls, verbally and physically. My oldest was bullied by girls verbally. And to see the girls go through that was heartbreaking. It was a rough couple of years going through that with them. And there's relatability there for me as well, because I was also bullied as a kid. So I had an idea of what they were dealing with and going through. But when I, take a step back and look through a wider lens, I mean, the fact of seeing the effects that it had on the girls carry through with them to the different stages of their lives, from elementary school to high school to now in their early 20s, their young adult lives, the effects are still there. I still see them. And I think that's heartbreaking, that anyone, not just because they're my daughters, but, that anyone has to go through and deal with anything like that. And I know that there are millions of young girls and women who go through and deal with that on a daily basis and have it affect how they see themselves. They don't love themselves. They're not confident in who they are. All of these things play into and damage them psychologically. Excuse me, I'm going to allergies.
Nice.
The effects that it has on young girls and women, and that they have to deal with these things. It's heartbreaking. And, so they are a huge part of it. My mom, my grandmother, they're the foundation of all of it. I was raised by those 2 women. My mom left my biological father when I was 10 years old. He was running around on her having an affair. And of course, back in those days, the women were the ones who stayed home to raise the children. Well, the husband was the one out working, making the money to support the family. So when I look back on that situation, the fact that my mom had the courage and the strength to stand up and say, no more, I don't have to put up with this anymore. And I'm not putting up with it anymore. I'm taking my boys and we're leaving. And that's what we did. We left with nothing but the clothes on our back. We moved into a 1-bedroom apartment. My mom slept on a couch. My brother and I shared the bedroom. And she had to get a job. She had to go back out into the workforce and get a job after being out of work for over 10 years because she stayed home to raise my brother and I. And when she was at work, my grandmother would step in and help raise us. So for me, those two women are everything. They're my heart, my soul. They're the biggest piece of inspiration behind all of this, because I wouldn't be who I am today. I wouldn't be the man I am today without those two women. They're examples of strength and resilience and courage. And with all that they taught me, all that they gave me, the 5 women in my life, my wife, my daughters, my mom, my grandmother, they are why I do this work. It is my way of saying thank you and giving back to women because of what these 5 women have done for me and brought to my life and given me and taught me. And so this is how I ended up here. I mean, there's a bit more to the journey, but I figured I'd give you the quick, short version of that.
So again, I think one of the big things when you're starting a podcast is understanding your why. Why are you doing this podcast? Why is it important to you? Because that's going to help you with your how.
Absolutely.
And your what and everything else that comes down the road. And if you lose a sense of your why, and you have a very clear why for your show,
absolutely.
I love that. It's kind of like guardrails on the highway. Yeah. It keeps you in the lane. You still have flexibility to move around, but it keeps you from going off the road and losing your way. So
absolutely,
your why is super important. Maybe for a new podcaster, before they hit record on their first episode, we talked about this together, that maybe guesting might be a good entryway into podcasting to figure out if it's something that you want to do, and just be on someone's show and get in the habit of being a guest, telling your story and doing that. Talk about that. Expand on that a little bit more about how guesting might be a good first step for a new podcaster.
Getting behind the mic, learning how to use a mic is important. I just think that being a guest just gets you used to, again, being in front of the mic, but also being interviewed and what it's like to be part of an interview, because I would think that most people do not have that experience of being interviewed or interviewing people. And I think getting yourself out there, putting yourself out there as a brand, as most of the people in my community are entrepreneurs. So I think that the getting out there as a guest is so important, because you want people to know who you are. If you're a podcaster, it's not about you. Being a guest on the podcast is when it's about you. So as an entrepreneur, I think it's incredibly important to start out guesting. If you want to start a podcast, absolutely. It's incredible. It's such an incredible gig. You get to meet incredible people, but I think the starting point needs to be as a guest, to get yourself into that space, get yourself out there, let people know who you are, the work you're doing, your brand, all of these things. When you're a podcaster, you don't have the chance. The light doesn't get shone on you. It's about shining the light on your guests. So I think that the guesting piece of it is so incredibly important, especially as an entrepreneur, to put yourself out there. And again, to get used to being in front of a microphone, conversing with people, interviewing people, all of the pieces that go along with that. I think it's a great jumping off point. I mean, podcasting, as you know, Dave, you have multiple podcasts, so you know how hard it is and how much work goes into it, how much dedication and consistency it takes to be a podcaster. So jump into the arena. In my opinion, if I could go back, I just jumped in both feet head first, whatever you want to call it. I don't think I did a guest spot on another podcast till I was about a year and a half into my podcasting journey. And if I could go back, I would flip it. I would have been a guest first to get that experience of being on a podcast and see what that's like. But we can't go back in time. So here we are. But now I am really starting to ramp up my guesting opportunities and put myself out there as a guest. Because when you're a podcaster, you're behind the scenes kind of thing. It's not, like I said, it's not about you. It's about shining the light on your guest and giving them the opportunity to share. So you're behind the scenes. When you're a guest, you're putting yourself out there. It takes courage, it takes strength to do that because a lot of people don't like putting themselves out there. So it's a good way to get yourself used to it as well.
Okay, so we have a lot of podcasters listening to the How to Podcast series, which is great. We have a lot of hosts looking for guests. Who would you be a great guest for, Brad? What show would you be like to go on as a guest? There's opportunities right here in front of us. Let's pitch you right now. What shows you want to be on? And people reach out to Brad. All of information in the show notes. But Brad, who would be a good show for you to go on and be a guest on?
Oh man. Anyone that has a show that talks about, I guess, entrepreneurship, storytelling, about elevating and amplifying women's voices, things like that. I'm honestly, I'm good to guest on any show that'll have me. I just love, I'm really starting to step into this space of being comfortable. I was one of those people that was not comfortable putting myself out there. Like I said, it took me a year and a half to get up to the point where it's like, okay, I got to start putting myself out there and getting people aware of what I'm doing. And I had multiple friends tell me, Brad, stop hiding in the shadows. You've got to put yourself out there. This work that you're doing needs to be shared, and people need to see the person who's doing the work. Like I said, when you're a podcaster, you're behind the scenes. You're not as visible. So I'm now just starting to step into this, step out of my comfort zone, push myself out of my comfort zone and stepping into the whole guesting platform. So anyone who has a show about strength, resilience, entrepreneurship, I mean, podcasting is all about storytelling, right? It's about telling people stories. So I'm game to be on anyone's podcast who will help me, who finds my journey or my story. I know I only gave a small snippet of it, but I mean, I'm up to speak to anybody and share the work that I'm doing, because I think it's important to elevate and amplify women's stories through podcasting. I love the platform of podcasting. I think it's an incredible way to reach people. You have access to not only your audience, but the podcaster's audience, who these are people you normally wouldn't have access to. So I think people should, yes, be selective about where you're putting yourself out there. It's got to be in alignment with your brand, with who you are and the work you're doing. Absolutely. But get yourself out there on as many podcasts as you can. It's so important. People need to see and know who you are. That's integral and important for entrepreneurship.
Yeah. And you're in the ears of a listening audience.
You have a captive
able to share
audience.
your message, right? Yeah. And then they're going to come to your show
That's
possibly
right.
as well. So I have Dad Space, which is a podcast for dads by dads.
Okay.
And I would love to have you there to talk about your relationship with your daughters, your wife, and your mom and your grandmother, and bring that story into Dad Space, because that podcast was created for men primarily, but over 65% of my audience now are female.
Really?
So
Dave, how many podcasts do you have? How do you do
right?
it? You're
I know it's crazy. It's crazy. But so that's an amazing podcast because you get to talk your dad's story.
Yeah.
And you could come on and talk about your story from a son's perspective, from a father's perspective, and a husband's perspective.
I've been on a lot of grief podcasts lately, actually, because I've had some grief that I've had to deal with in turn. I lost my grandmother in 2020 and I lost my dad in 2021. So that's been something that I've been on. I've been on 3 or 4 in the last little while. So that's been interesting to get into that space and speak about that story. I mean, we are multifaceted people. We have so many different aspects of our lives. So sharing stories, like I said, it goes back to the fact that we as human beings, I believe every single person on this planet has a story to share or has stories to share. And you need to get them out there. You need to share them with people, because undoubtedly, I can guarantee you they will resonate with at least one person. And really, when all's said, isn't that what it's about? Is helping others to get through, and so that they don't have to go through or deal with similar. So if I can share something, a viewpoint or part of my struggle that is going to help someone so that they don't have to go through a certain part and they can avoid that, I'll gladly share it. That's, in my opinion, that's what we're all here for, is to help each other and support one another.
Yeah, it's like jumping back into time to like caveman days and 100 people trying to figure out the perfect wheel by themselves
Yeah.
without talking to each other, instead of working on their own concept of a wheel. If you all work together, you can probably do way more by just
Absolutely.
collaborating, sharing your stories, sharing what you've learned, how you failed, and maybe you'll come up with a better wheel.
Well, look at this right here, what we're doing right now, Dave. I mean, we're collaborating. We are both podcasters and
Canadian podcasters.
Canadian podcast, and we connected and we had a
Right.
discussion about helping other podcasters. That's what this is
Yeah.
about. That's what this podcast
Yeah.
is about, is to sharing information and knowledge through our experiences to help others. Community and collaboration are keys to life, to entrepreneurship, to everything. We are not meant to do anything alone in this life. Why would we do something siloed? You're not going to get nearly as much done if you silo yourself. If we bring like-minded people together in a community, in collaboration, we are going to be able to accomplish so much more. Our voices are going to be so much louder if we unite. So why wouldn't we bring others together, like-minded people? It serves everybody, right?
Okay, so yeah, you got me. I'm signed up. Let's go. Yeah, I'm with you. So for your podcast, when you started early days, episode 1 to 10, was it interview from episode 1 right away, or did you kind of grow into episodes?
No.
Okay, so for that, then how do you find a guest on episode 1 of an interview show? You have no recorded episodes.
Nope.
I've had people reach out and ask me this, Dave. How do I do this? How do I create an interview show with no episodes?
Honestly, I started with friends. Because I was a photographer. I am a photographer. Not I was a photographer. I am a photographer, and I was in multiple photography communities. And of course, in the genre that I was photographing, boudoir, predominantly it is a female industry. So I had female friends who were boudoir photographers, and so that's where I started. My makeup artist, one of my makeup artists, I interviewed her, and the rest were photographers. I interviewed one lawyer. She was a friend of mine as well, but it was predominantly photographers. So because of the nature and the subject matter of my podcast, it was just a natural fit. It was very easy. I just reached out to friends, and that's where I started. And then it grew to, so I think my first 8 interviews were with friends, and I was publishing one episode every 2 weeks back then when I first started, because I didn't have a lot of content. And so I had actually jumped in and got all 8 of my episodes recorded before I released any of them, because I wanted to have that content in the can, as they say, so that if something happened, I couldn't record one week, I could lean on my bank of content. But I started with friends. So I would say that's depending upon the subject matter. But I mean, we all have connections and relationships. And so I would start with friends, of course, depending upon the content or the subject matter. It's an easy place to start. Then what I started doing was reaching out to, I would scroll through Instagram, through social media, see profiles that resonated for me. I'd look through their content, see what they were doing, see the type of work they were doing, and I would just send DMs. I would just reach out explaining who I was, a little bit about the platform, and a link to my episodes so they could check it out, so they had an idea of what it was all about. And now I'm at the point where over 3 years in, I don't even have to look for guests anymore. I have women I've done over 500 interviews. So I've got women who I've interviewed that are sending me guests. They're connecting me with people. So it takes time to build. And that's one thing I will say, is you have to be dedicated and you have to be consistent, as I'm sure you can speak to as well, Dave. Consistency and dedication are keys to podcasting, right? I mean, you got to stay the path if this is something you want to do.
Yeah, and for me, I look at my podcast not in bulk. I look at them as individual episodes.
Right.
And I need to show up for each one.
Yeah.
100%. There's a quote I read somewhere, wherever you are, be all there.
Yes.
And I'm like, that's it. You have to be in the recording with your guest, 100%. You can't be scrolling through your phone going, oh, yeah, what? I wasn't listening. Like you're the host of the show. You're here to create the environment and create that open space to have a conversation. So
I think that is incredibly key. I have had multiple women on my show as guests tell me that they have been on other podcasts where they felt like they weren't even being listened to by the host. And I think that's horrible. That's your one job you have as a host, is to listen to your guests. It's about shining a light on them. So you have to be present. And I've told many women too, if you're not, if you've got a podcast interview booked and you're not feeling 100%, like in the zone, if you're not feeling well, whatever, don't do it. Because if you show up half-assed, it's going to come through in the interview. People are going to be able to hear that. You want to be on your game, bring your A game, and be 100% all the time when you're doing podcasts, because this is your brand you're putting out there. You're putting yourself out there. You want to always give your best when you're being a guest on a podcast. If you can't give 100%, don't show up. Reach out to the host, give them notice, and let them know that, hey, listen, you know what? I'm really not feeling up to it today. Can we reschedule? I'm telling, a podcaster will appreciate the honesty and being upfront, as opposed to showing up half-assed or not even showing up at all and not even letting them know. I'm sure you've experienced that. How do you like that? How does that make you feel when people don't show up?
Well, see, I work nights full time, and I do this during the day. So
Right.
I'm actually giving up sleep to do this. So I will like delay going to bed because I have interviews in the morning when I get home. And when I have 3 or 4 people in a row not show up, that's frustrating because I could have been sleeping right now. Right? I've been up since yesterday.
Yeah.
So, I would love to go to bed, but I'm making time for you and I want to work around your calendar. So I'm here. I'm ready to go. I've done my research.
Yeah.
So same goes both ways.
Yeah.
I think really. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up.
And how did you start out getting your first interviews on your very first podcast?
That was my Living the Next Chapter podcast for authors. One of my early guests, I reached out to him, and I, completely honest, I had no reason to have any time in his calendar.
Right.
Super, super sought after speaker, author. He's on the big podcasts.
Yeah.
I'm just a new guy.
Yeah.
I'm not even an author, and I have an author podcast. Like, who am I? Right. So I listened to some of his other episodes, and this actually happened. He was on someone's show answering the question the host just asked him, and the host's phone goes off, starts ringing. Like the guest is mid-answer, right?
Wow.
And he's like, well, and the host goes, 1 minute, answers
Really?
the phone, hello, has a conversation with the person on the phone while the guest is waiting during the recording, hangs up, and then doesn't even acknowledge the half-answered question, goes to the next question.
Are you kidding me?
Right. And he left it all in. He could have edited that out too. Maybe that's one thing, but he left it in. So I reached out to this guest.
Yeah.
And he comes on my screen. I always do a pre-interview.
Yeah.
And he comes on and I said, hi, I'm Dave. He's like, tell me about your numbers right out of the gate. And I'm like,
Here we go.
Well, I have 2 episodes. I have 10 listens. I've been doing this for a month. And he looked at me like, like, what kind of value is it in for me?
Right.
Right. And you can tell we were kind of losing him.
Right.
I was losing him right there. So what I said to him was, potential guest, I want to apologize to you right off the bat. And he looked at me like, what are you talking about? I just met you like 5 seconds ago.
Yeah.
I said, I talked about that episode
Yeah.
where the guy took a call. And I said, I want to apologize to you on behalf of podcasters because you were treated unfairly on XXX show.
Yeah.
And I felt bad for you and I felt embarrassed for you. So I promise you I'll never do that to you. And I'm sorry that happened. He said, Dave, I don't care about your numbers. When do I sign up?
There we go. That was your selling point right there, right? Because you expressed sympathy, because that's what a good host does. And you were just new to the game. And even you knew that. You knew that that's not right. Like,
I felt awkward as a listener. I'm like, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't visual. It was just audio.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whose phone's ringing? Who are they talking to? And you could hear the silence from the guest. Like, I can't believe this is happening.
Exactly. Okay.
Right? So, yeah.
Oh my gosh. So this brings up an interesting point. You brought up the numbers. I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I'm sure you've, as this gentleman did right out of the gate, And I'm sure it's happened multiple times. So what is that?
all the time.
What do you think of that when that's people's first question when you're approaching them to be a guest and they say, "Well, what are your numbers?" What do you think of that? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I understand that they're looking for value on their end.
Mm-hmm.
We're asking them to give up time out of their calendar.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the higher and more important they are in the world of whatever,
Yeah.
their time is money.
Mm-hmm.
And like this guy I talked to today before we chatted, he's a very important person on many big TV shows, and he has a lineup of people waiting to speak to him.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm in the queue of having time with him. So he wants to make sure it's worth their time.
Right.
I get that.
Okay.
But the biggest thing I would say is there's this big mystery. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz and the curtain.
Yeah.
Look behind the curtain, right? As podcasters, we have this curtain, and don't pay attention to what's happening behind the curtain.
Yeah.
But when it comes to numbers, everybody's like, well, I'll just multiply it by 10, and that's my number. And like, who does that serve?
No
Like,
one.
I don't understand. It doesn't serve anyone.
No.
So when you come on and you say, I have 5 listeners, it's your guest's opportunity to go, okay, well, this isn't going to fit with my calendar right now, but maybe in the future. That's fine.
Right.
But don't come on and when you're brand new and you have one episode and you have 100,000 downloads. I don't understand how that's possible. So I think we need to normalize the conversation around numbers a little bit more.
Yeah.
And pull that curtain down, because I think there's a lot of new podcasters with 1 to 10 episodes who have 10 to 20 listens, and they think they're doing great.
Yeah.
You are. People are listening to your show.
Absolutely.
Out of a myriad of other things people could be doing in life, they stop to listen to you. So that's worth something.
Absolutely.
So
it is.
if we can normalize the talk around numbers and be honest with our guests, celebrate the wins, but go back to your why.
Yeah.
Why are you doing this? If you wanted to reach out and you wanted to influence one life in your podcast, and you've done that, does 100,000 matter?
No.
Or does 1 matter? Because it's the one that you're trying to find.
That's
and
right.
help.
That's right.
So
If you're in alignment, with your why, if you found your why,
yes.
you have, as you said right off the top, you have to have a why. There has to be a driving reason why you're doing this. Otherwise, what's the point?
Now your why can grow.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to create a comedy podcast and your why is I want to get people to laugh.
Yeah.
So you do a funny episode, everyone laughs.
Yeah.
Congratulations, you met your success. You're
That's
done.
right. That's right.
You did it.
Yeah.
So now what's your new why?
Yeah. Yeah.
I want 10 people to laugh. I want 100 people to laugh. I want to be a comedian. Okay, well now we have a new why.
Yeah.
That's fine. Your why can grow and
Absolutely.
change and get bigger, get smaller. But have your why.
Yeah.
And measure your why, measure your success against yourself.
Yeah.
Because I go into these Facebook group rooms and you see a brand new podcaster jump up there and I got my first 100 listens. Yay.
Yeah.
And then you have somebody like, oh, I get that in every 5 seconds. It's like,
Yeah.
well, why did you have to say that?
Exactly.
Why did you have to tear them down?
Why can't we
let's build
celebrate
each other
that
up.
person?
Yeah, celebrate.
Right? They deserve that celebration. They have put in the work that they needed to get to that point. Everyone starts from somewhere. Everyone starts at the beginning. And that's what we need to remember. So what? You've got, how many years have you been doing this? Whereas you can say, oh, who cares? I get that every 5 seconds, right?
Yeah.
Well, you started at the beginning. So did you get that at the very beginning? Probably not. Chances are slim to none. So why what good does it do to tear someone down or to burst someone's bubble who is just starting out? And yes, of course, we're talking about podcasting, but in anything, why would you do that to someone? You could shatter someone's dreams by doing that. And that's wrong.
Yeah. And the great equalizer across the board is no matter if you're Joe Rogan or Dave Campbell, every episode goes up with 0 listens.
That's right.
Might be a fraction of a second for some people.
Yeah.
Might take days for others.
Yeah.
But everybody starts at 0.
That's right.
Every episode, every podcast, 0 listeners, 0 followers.
Yeah.
It's a common denominator across the board.
The playing field is level.
What happens after that can depend on you being a famous person or a new person to the world or community or all that other thing can happen. But we all start at 0.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I heard someone talking about, I think it was Grant Cardone. I'm not sure. but he was talking about podcasting, and they were talking about the numbers and things. And, you know, he said, I don't care whether this person has 100 listeners or 100,000 listeners. He says, for me, it's about getting my message out there. So if I go on a podcast that has 100 listeners versus 100,000, that's 100 new listeners. And I think this is the way we need to shift around this, right? That's 100 new listeners that I didn't have before. So what do I care? I'm reaching 100 new people. And in the process, I'm helping this person grow their audience because my audience is going to tune in. So who cares if you have 100 or 100,000? That's something that it used to drive me nuts, Dave, when that would be the first question when I would reach out to someone.
Yeah.
And the first question, I'm like, well, how many listeners do you have? How many downloads do you have? And it used to piss me off and frustrate the hell out of me. And then I got to a point where it's like, you know what? You're not my people. If that's what you're concerned about, then we're not a good match. So, but it took a while. It took me at least a year and a half to shift that mindset around that. But it used to piss me off. It's like, really? That's what you care about? And now I'm at the point where it's like, okay, well, if that's what you're concerned about, you're not a good fit. I don't want you on my podcast because my podcast is about the messaging. It's about getting women's stories out there. If you're concerned about how many people you're going to reach, you're not for me. And I think that's where we as podcasters need to switch that mentality and get into that mindset. And I think that as a guest too, which you touched on briefly, I think something I learned early on in my entrepreneurial journey as a photographer, we need to step into relationships, and this applies for podcasting. As a guest, what value can I bring to your audience? It's not about what you can do for me. If you go in with this me mentality, you're going to go nowhere real quick. No one's going to want to have you on their podcast. No one's going to want to get into business with you. No one's going to want to collaborate with you, partner with you. That's not the mentality you go in with. I can remember going to networking meetings when I first started my business, and I had my stack of business cards that shows you dating myself here.
Yeah.
And I was all about handing my business. What am I going to get out of this? And it got me nowhere. I went nowhere so fast. It's when I shifted my mindset to realize, no, that's not what it's about. You can't approach things like that. You have to approach it with, what value can I bring to you? What can I do to support you? What can I do to help you? I'm a photographer. You own this business. How can we collaborate? And what can I do that's going to bring value to your customers, your clients? That's the way you need to look at it. And the same thing goes for podcasting. What can I do as a guest? What knowledge or wisdom can I bring to your podcast that's going to help your listeners? And if you go in with that attitude, it will undoubtedly pay you back in spades down the road.
I love it. And let's jump back to as a host of a podcast where you interview people.
Yeah.
You're kind of you don't get to talk about your stories as much.
No.
Because you're highlighting your guest, right? So by being a guest on other shows where you're typically the host of the podcast, your audience gets to hear a different side of you that you don't get to talk about or you don't think to talk about.
Yeah.
Which gives new light to you as a host and new appreciation for your audience when they're like, well, now I understand Brad's why. Yeah. Now I understand why he's doing the podcast. Or I didn't know that about Brad. That's another layer of Brad I never knew.
Absolutely.
So now I have a better appreciation for Brad as a host of this podcast.
Now I'll go check out Brad's podcast. Where you don't get that opportunity. Podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's very important, I think, as hosts to do podcast swaps, collaborate with other podcasters. And again, helping other podcasters recommend guests as a podcaster too. Hey, Dave, you know what? I've got a couple of guests I would love to introduce you to, have them on your show. Again, it goes back to that whole collaboration and community piece, right? If we help each other, it's a win-win-win for everybody. Community is the key. Community and collaboration, absolutely key in everything. It's so important, and we lose sight of that.
Yeah, instead of fighting for our spot in the world and elbowing other podcasts out of the way, right? We need to be more welcoming and help each other.
Absolutely, right? Yes, 100%, because everyone benefits. That's again, it just goes back to the basics of why we're here on this planet. Is to help and support one another, to lift each other up, to cheerlead each other.
Yeah.
So if I can help someone, I'll gladly do it in any way I possibly can. As long as it's within my ability to do so, I'm more than happy to help anyone.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, you told me about the story of seeing someone, you mentioned it briefly, not that particular story, but where a podcaster knocked down another podcaster because they weren't far enough along in their game. Well, they started at the beginning. So did you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
why would you do that to someone? It gets you
Right.
nowhere. What does that
Yeah.
make you feel more important than that person or bigger than that person? Why wouldn't you, instead of doing that, why wouldn't you flip it and help them? Say, hey, here, I've got a couple of tips for you. Or say, good job. You don't even have to help them in that way. We're giving them a couple of tips, but support them. Give them some positive reinforcement as opposed to knocking them down, because that doesn't serve anybody. You're making that person feel like shit. And what does that do for
Yeah,
you?
exactly. Right? So when I see people post in a Facebook group, I had just released my first episode.
Yeah.
I'm really super happy. It's been a long journey, blah, blah, blah. And then you see people like, what kind of mic are you using? Who's your host? Blah, 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 blah. And I just come in there and I go, congratulations.
Yeah.
You've done something that most people haven't done.
Exactly.
So celebrate.
Yeah. And that's
And
the
then
other piece.
And then leave.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah.
I think that's another very important piece, is to celebrate your wins. You mentioned it earlier. We don't, as human beings, we don't typically celebrate our wins. We're so busy checking off that list of things we've got to get done, and then right away on to the next thing. Whereas we need to take a breath and step back and look at what you've accomplished and celebrate that. Be proud of that. Celebrate it. And celebrate with others. When you stand up and celebrate your wins, that's a permission slip for others to stand up and celebrate theirs. Again, it's support, right?
There's the quote right there. That was the quote. That was it. Do it again. That was amazing. Do it again. That was it.
When you stand up and celebrate your wins, it's a permission slip for others to stand up and celebrate theirs. It's a win-win for everybody. We need to do that. We need to take the time to do that.
Yeah.
Help celebrate others' wins. Why wouldn't you? Congratulate them. Be happy for someone else. This isn't about you. It's not all about you. But so many people are stuck in that, right, Dave? I mean,
yeah.
We've all seen it. And it's no way to live. It's not a way to live. It's really not.
Yeah. I love it. So Brad, how do we cultivate our Canadian podcast brothers and sisters? What's the plan? What are we going to do to get more Canadians into podcasting, or at least assemble us somehow?
Yeah, I think.
Any thoughts? What do you think you do?
I think we've got to create a Facebook group. And anyone listening to Dave's podcast now, if you're a Canadian podcaster, reach out to Dave or me, and let's connect, and let's start to grow a community. Let's build a community of Canadian podcasters. Why not? We need it. Let's support each other. Again, it goes back to community. Let's support one another. So let's bring on as many Canadian podcasters into the world of podcasting. It's a beautiful space. Podcasting is incredible. It's like no other medium out there. You can grow your audience. You can reach people that you never had access to. I love podcasting. It's absolutely incredible. And you get to have conversations with amazing people and share their stories, help shine a light on them. It's absolutely incredible.
Right.
I love it.
Okay. Well, we'll put a link to that in the show notes when it's ready, but I would love to collaborate with you on that as well. And encourage more Canadians.
Do it, Dave. We're going to do it.
Okay. Because when I look at my stats and I see like 80% American listeners and 3% Canadian, I'm like, where is everyone?
We need to flip the script on that.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
We're going to do that. The Americans will come to Canada for podcasting stuff.
We need to get podcasts. And you and I spoke about this when we first connected. We need to get a podcasting conference in Canada. But as we said, we'll start with building a community first. So let's start there. We put it out there right now here on your podcast. We are doing this. We are going to build a community of Canadian podcasters. And then the next step is to get a podcasting conference in Canada.
And Brad will be speaking there at the conference, and you can get his merch. You can meet Brad. There'll be a lineup out the door to meet Brad, which will be
And
great.
Dave.
And he'll
And
take your
Dave.
picture at the same time. You might have to change a little bit. He might have to ask you to get into an outfit, but Brad will take your picture as well. So,
Dave will be there. You'll be there right beside me, my friend,
There
right
you
beside
go.
me,
Love
because again, this is built. We don't do it alone. So you and I will build this community. You heard it here first. We are
There you
building
go.
a podcasting community
News
for
has
Canadians.
happened. So Brad, can you
Yes.
please promise me that you'll come back and chat again in the future?
Absolutely. It would be my honor,
Okay.
Dave. I'm so grateful for having this opportunity to sit and chat with you today. And if we can help others step into guesting as podcasters or becoming podcasters through what our journeys, our individual journeys, I'm more than happy to do it. I want to help spread the word about the importance of podcasting and how amazing it is. So yes, I would be honored to come back and speak with you again, Dave. Anytime.
Okay.
You let me know,
And
and
then
I'm there.
For our Canadian podcast listeners and new podcasters listening from Canada, you and I will get together halfway point, find a Timmy's,
Yeah.
have a double,
Yes, we will.
right?
Yes.
And all those things. I'm sorry for saying that.
Just had to.
Sorry, but we'll get together and we'll do that.
Yeah.
Wear our toques and
Yes.
bring our ketchup chips. We'll do all the things. Okay.
Sorry. Sorry.
Sorry for our American listeners who have no idea what we're talking about. But we'll get together and have a Timmy's together. That'd be great.
I would love that, Dave. That'd be awesome.
All right, Brad, where do we find you? Where's all the stuff? I have your website in front of me. It's beautiful, by the way.
Thank you.
Where do we go?
Empowerographypodcast.com, or you can catch me on Instagram at Empowerographypodcast, or email me if you're interested in chatting about podcasting, or if you're a female listener out there and you'd like to speak about being a possible guest, please feel free to email me at empowerographypodcast@gmail.com.
And if you're looking for an amazing guest to come on your show, Brad is here. He's ready to come on and talk about
Thank you, Dave.
whatever your topic is and promote a show at the same time. Brad, thank you so much for making time.
Dave, thank you very much for having me as a guest.